to the Standout CEO Show, your gateway to building a standout business with your personal brand. And today are talking about what great listeners actually do and or what they don't do to be great listeners. You know, chances are that you, and I'm talking to you right there who are listening to this, you think you're a great listener already. You're going, yeah, I can listen pretty well. And, also along with that, chances are that most of the advice that you've been given about how to be a great listener actually falls kind of short of developing good listening skills that kind of miss the boat. And the truth is that we're living in a world of people who think that they're good at listening, but most of us, myself included, are really not. Like when I told my girlfriend what today's topic was, she's going, what's your interview on today? I go, oh, it's all about listening skills. And he goes, oh, that's fine. You better take some notes. So anyway, here's the thing. Like, what if great listening came from actually subtracting what isn't working instead of adding more? So this is the main question that today's guest, Jacob Coldwell, is raising in his work to make us all better listeners. Now, Jacob is the author of a book called Listening Simply: How to Understand What People Are Saying. And he's the founder of Mountain Pass Coaching. So stay tuned, buckle up. We're going to take a deep dive into the tools and the insight that will help you repair your relationships with your girlfriend, be a better listener, restore your leadership, work better in teams, and make you a force, a natural force in any human endeavor. Think of that. So, Jacob, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks.
All right, so to start this off, why, like the big picture here, like why is it that we live in a time of horrible listeners?
Yeah, at least it is, and I'll start with, I don't really know a lot about Eastern culture, but Western culture, we're about producing, we're about growing, we're about making things happen. And I think that busyness, that healthy growth, hey, we do want to accomplish something with our lives, can also be a weakness in that we're not creating the space to be able to receive and process it in a way. We just kind of learn habits and then just continue on with them.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder at the moment that we live in, especially with the internet connectedness of our world and the capability, like in my world as a videographer and somebody who's helping people make video, we've all become content creators. We've all become broadcasters of a type. And that role of being a broadcaster makes us like the polar opposite of being good listeners. It's like, no, I have something important to say and you need to listen to me. This is my turn to talk. And then of course you overlay on top of that the polarization that has been occurring as of late, like especially the last half decade. The online discourse, this sort of short form talking back and forth, which is not really a back and forth. It's mostly just talking at one another. And there's practically zero listening going on, which I think is kind of a epidemic. Like we've reached epidemic proportions of talking without hearing. So, I mean, like, how do we move from this state of dysfunctional discourse? That's the way I'll call it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point, and if you think about where we're going as a society, we're not going to be void of information. So perhaps we all need to start working at and understanding is how do we intake information, but then also organize it and move it in a way where it has some practical relevance to us. I guess becoming more knowledgeable about things that won't actually change our factor. And so I think that shift's going to come up. And it's funny because overwhelm is one of those things that happens when we get all this information and we end up just kind of altering or spinning in cycles. And so it's in some ways it's a good thing because it's forcing us to reconsider our approach and our habits.
Yeah. So as we take a look at this a little bit in more detail, I made reference to how there's a lot of advice out there on learning how to be a better listener. And it follows things like, well, when someone's talking to you, nod your head and go, uh-huh, uh-huh. And then when they pause for a moment, reflect back and say, oh, well, I heard you say this. And you basically, make sure I understand like what you're saying by repeating what they said, kind of thing. And as my understanding, like a lot of that, it's not necessarily nonsense, but it's not really helping that much. And when we talked earlier in our pre-show conversation, you were talking about how actually, instead of adding more stuff like those kinds of things to your to-do list, there are ways to actually not like don't do certain things that will actually improve how you're listening. So move in that direction. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the point you're bringing up is saying that most of the advice, the popular advice out there is to say, hey, you need more skills, you need more, the way I always joke with it is saying it's like you need to have direct eye contact. You have to, and what happens when you start to add all those things is the focus actually becomes more on you. And so the premise of subtracting is actually to eliminate things to allow space for somebody else to show and have some less deliberate time. It's like as kids, sitting in a sandbox, like for this amount of time, we're just gonna see what the world gives us, and we don't have to get anywhere. We don't have to go anywhere because that when we believe that there's a place to go, we've kind of almost stopped listening at the beginning of it, and we've just started moving forward towards action, which ultimately is going to happen, but for a time and a space, eliminating some of the distractions and just allowing you and I to have a conversation. But you don't need to add much to that. We already we're already listening, but a lot and something else. And subtraction is really just separating that out and saying, let's just focus on listening for a second.
Yeah, I love the subtraction analogy. Now I'm not going to remember the author's name or the book that it was in, but I was reading a book lately. Like I read so much stuff that it kind of goes by, and I like to reference people, but this one I don't remember. But in any case, the story was this guy was playing with his 4-year-old, 5-year-old son, and they were playing with Legos, and they were building a bridge. And it came to be that that one of the pillars of the bridge was this high, and the other pillar was shorter. And so when they put the top on the bridge, it was not level. And so he immediately, the author, the guy, started looking around for, well, I need to add another thing for the pillar. Like I need to get another block so it'll bring it up to level. And before he could find the brick that he wanted to put on there, his son removed one of the bricks on the tall one and had made it level. And he turned around and goes, "Oh, you fixed it." And
Yes.
this was, the book is called Effortless. That's the, and the whole question of the book is like, what if it could be easy? And so this sort of snowballed into his whole premise for this book that he wrote, which is instead of adding more things to what we need to do, what are the things that we could remove that would make it more effortless? And I think there's a really good analogy here around listening. Like, what are the things that we could remove that would make listening easy and would make us being, more receptive and more able to hear what's being said easier for us? And like, I know, like in the setting of this, like we're doing a podcast and this is live and I'm looking at a camera. And so I have all these, and I'm managing the stream, so I have all these things that are sort of kind of distractions where instead of looking at you, like if I look at you, I'm here. And if I look at the camera, I'm up here. And so I want to look at the camera, which is one distraction. and and I'm doing this like when you speak, I'm going, yeah, right, and like all this stuff, like I'm doing all these things, and I'm going, I wonder what could I do that's not this that would still work in this medium and still make me a better listener. Because one of the goals of what I do with this work is that I really try to listen in these conversations, because I come to this conversation without a list of questions, without like specific written down, here's exactly what I want us to talk about. I have an idea, and we've had a conversation ahead of time to talk about a little bit, but this wants to be an actual conversation, and the only way that it can be is if I do, in fact, listen to things that you have to say.
And I think that's the essence of it, is just understanding there's a lot of complexity to this. And I think sometimes we try to manage all the complexity instead of kind of just making it more simple for ourselves and saying, at the end of the day, the reason I'm even here or wanting to talk to you, because there's value in both your humanity and what you're doing, and and that's enough. Like we don't have to do it perfectly. We don't have to like if I turn this way and talk to you, you're still listening to me. It's just weird, right?
Right.
But there's not like a checkbox to be able to say, well, you stared at me long enough. Because and the other part is like if I stare too much at you, then you find me creepy. So there's all these things. It's like, but at the end of the day, if we're focusing on if the level of effort or the skill of presenting myself as a listener is purpose of connecting with you and understanding what you're trying to say, but also help you clarify what that is, because a lot of the conversation is not necessarily about going anywhere. It's really about understanding, but before that is connecting with somebody, and just it takes time because you have a busy life, I have a busy life, we have a lot going on, and it's almost like a thing. Like if you think about stepping into water, like usually the dirt and the silt all just kind of blows up, and it takes a little bit of time just to rest and be at peace. And hey, we're just gonna have a conversation, and this stuff has to drop before we can actually see or hear each other.
Yeah, I find that one of the biggest mistakes that I make when people are talking is that I will come up with something that I want to say, and immediately I have an agenda, and I'm just waiting for them to stop. Like I'm no longer listening to them at all. I'm going, okay, I'm ready. And I might even do, physical things like start to fidget with my thumbs or something as a physical signature. Like I'm ready. I'm ready to speak now.
Yeah, yeah,
And this goes to the place of like when you're in that mode of actively doing something, whatever it is, whatever you're thinking, whatever, like I'm engaging in this conversation and I'm actively doing something to engage there. What you were said before, like the attention becomes entirely on what's going on for me and my brain and my thinking, and I completely lose the person who's in front of me. It's almost like they disappear.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there's the space of what we think about what's going on, and that usually is what's overtaking a conversation. And it comes from, it's not necessarily all our fault. Like there's a reaction here because there's unknown in every conversation. And I think the preparation or part of the subtraction is actually understanding is like, you and I have never had this conversation, and I could come in and be like, okay, well, what do I need to do? Like, how do I perform well, or what do I need to bring to the table to show value? And I think that wanting to show value to other people, be useful, is just inherent in us. And when we subtract that out and we just say like, okay, like I'm a normal person, you seem normal, it's there's I guess less expectation, and removing that expectation, just saying we don't know what we don't know until we get there. And when we start to have a conversation, it's going to go somewhere, and it's okay that we don't know where that is yet.
All right, so we're talking a little bit about, these are, one-on-one kinds of interactions. When it comes to being a leader, and or in the case of people who are wanting to lead, in their role as an influencer or to grow their following or build their personal brand or that kind of thing, which is one of the one of the parts of our business these days. Like everybody is this whole brand called you thing is it seems to be we all need to get there. Like it's this job that in addition to our job, we need to be online, be connected, speak on stages, write a book, do all these things where our authority is being built for the thing that we want to be known for. And in that role, as a leader, we're losing, we're not listening particularly well when we do that. And, the worst case examples are authors who go off into the woodshed and write their book and come out, "Ta-dum, I got this thing." And it may be a good work or maybe not. Like it was not done with input and or necessarily a lot of listening to the people who they're writing for. So what would you suggest as a way to counter that, like in any kind of leadership role or any kind of influencer role or creator role? How do we maintain our listening capabilities and listening practice so that when people hear from us, they feel like we're listening to them?
Okay, so I picked up on like there's probably two or three different things going on here.
Okay.
So I'll try to unpack them, and if I forget something, then I'm not going to be offended at all. I think there's a place of what's the difference between attention and engagement, right? So attention is we have to promote, and we do have to speak and speak loudly, clearly, effectively. And the engagement part, though, happens before or after, is the part where we respond or react to what we're seeing going on as we speak, right? So it's okay to say something, it's okay and listen and look and see what's going on after that. So to, I guess, trying to bridge all of those topics together, it's really about trying to do two different things, but at separate times and keeping them in somewhat different spaces, right? So, and if I want to listen to you, I have a different mindset than if I'm going to have an interview like this. This is this is not all listening, and in some ways, I need to improve on how to speak more clearly. There's other aspects of my life, so it's not listening all the time, but our listening and our speaking go hand in hand, and so we need a space and a time for both.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think, like, from the point of view of, anyone in business needs to market themselves in some way. And that requires you to share your messaging. Like the thing what is it that you believe in, and what are your values, and what's the change that you're trying to make in the world? That all of us are doing all of those, are wanting to do all of those things. And if we say those things, and we've all seen bad marketing and bad advertising, which is speaking at us in a way that we just go, well, you completely could care less about me with this message. You're like, this hasn't got anything to do with me, or worse, you're saying something that clearly you have no regard for a person like me. And so this is the thing where there's a process in developing this kind of communication, which requires good listening. And so this is the question I have for you is like, okay, so I want to go out into the world and I want to listen. Like, to me, all good marketing probably needs to start with a lot of really good listening. And so share, like, how would you approach that? Like, what are your ways of thinking about being a good listener to the people who you want to talk to?
So this is a great second book on Socratic listening. or Socratic learning. And so basically, Socrates, his point was to be able to say, hey, here's an element of truth, and the group of people that he was teaching or learning with would then ask questions around that. And I think that's, for me, that model example of saying, like, well, let me throw something out there that's clear, concise, that people can actually engage with. If they want to engage with it, they will. If not, they won't. The secondary part is not just to keep rattling off more information or more pieces, but it's actually giving an opportunity for engagement to be able to say, well, what do you think about that? And then you start to hear the voice of your customer, you start to hear the voice of other people. But there is an element of starting someplace and not just leaving ambiguous, right?
Yeah. Yeah, right. I like that's a I remember reading some of Socrates'
Yeah,
conversations. That's great. I
yeah.
can imagine following him around all day, and he would kind of drive you nuts because he would never give you the answer. He would just ask another question. Um, but
And
that's a
it's
good, could be a really good, certainly a good learn about your customers and or audience way to be. Just continue to ask more questions and see what comes back.
Yeah, and it's funny. So I think the kind of the first book I read on that, I remember thinking in my head, I'm like, nobody actually cares what I think or what I have to say unless it relates. And so that actually was the trigger for me to actually start listening more. Is like, nobody's actually listening to me anyway, so I might as well get good at something else. And in some ways too, when you're having conversations with people, it really Socratic method where instead of me giving you a topic, what I'm helping clarify is what topic do you want to talk about, and then I just ask questions around that. I mean, that's as simple as you can make it, is actually what's going on. But that commitment to giving them space and caring only about what they want to talk about is really important.
Yeah, and I've been noticing some of the interactions that you're doing, say on LinkedIn, both with just text posting and recently with some of the videos. And so, and in fact, a number of the things that you've been doing have been getting quite a bit of response, people engaging with you. So, in the work that you've done, have you found that, oh, I used to do this, but then I took this thing away and now it's working better? Or just like share a little bit of that experience of what you've been learning in your own process.
I've been learning a ton, when we come back to separate, what's the difference between listening and having to engage or draw attention, that's a much harder place for me to exist in, is trying to, how do you gain attention? Because I really don't, it's not something that I wake up in the morning and go like, hey, look at me, and not that like a narcissistic way that people engage, like there's a necessity to this. But I think in learning, posting different ways, trying new things, different things. And at the end of this, I think having a clear why I'm posting is really, really important, because there's a lot of times where I'm trying to do something else that's successful for somebody else. And I start to lose my own voice or what me. And, I've only been really kind of engaging on LinkedIn for about a year. And every time I try to try something new, it tired of it, and I just want to come back to, at the end of the day, I just want to have a conversation with people, and giving a topic that's interesting enough, that's clear enough, challenges them in a certain way, will create that conversation.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's really important to bring your point of view to the kind of, I mean, basically what we're talking about here is you're moderating a conversation that you want to have,
Mm-hmm.
and or you're initiating a conversation that you want to have every time you do something. And most people are so deep in the process of stuff, so you'll see posts like, oh, look, I looked at 257 bloggers and this is what I learned, you know. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
great, but what's your point of view?
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. Like, or here's 5 ways to do whatever it is you want to do. That's kind of helpful information, but there's no deeper meaning. There's no point of view. There's no, I could go to, this is where the whole thing with artificial intelligence and the chat GPT stuff drives me nuts because it's like, well, I can go on and make that thing spit out any number of, you know, bits of information, but it doesn't really matter. Like it's like you're right. Like I can also go on to Google and say, you know, ask any question and it'll give me an answer. It'll give me a lot of answers, but there's no human there, and there's no point of view, and there's no real like here's the meaning behind this. Here's the purpose behind this. Here's what we're really doing, you know, that anyone would even care about.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the thing, like if you can bring that to your conversations, as in like, you know, here's something that I care about. And I mean, Seth Godin talks about this all the time, like saying, you know, people like us do things like this. You know, this group of people are people who care about this thing or these 5 things. And this is why we're meeting, and this is why we're talking, and this is why we're doing anything that we're doing together. And this is where good conversation and good listening can come from, because when you really care about something and you're with other people who also care about that thing, even if they don't agree with you, even if, you know, they care about something, but they're going, actually, I don't agree with you on this part. I want to go over here. You can both have a caring, meaningful conversation where you listen to each other and you actually go, oh, really? That's so interesting that you think that, you know, and
Yeah.
tell me more, you know, tell me why you think that and tell me where that comes from and on, like whatever. And that's where, to me, that kind of discourse, that kind of engagement is what cultivates great listeners, and it cultivates some kind of interaction where we really do learn from one another and we really do see each other's as human beings. So yeah, okay, so my question there is, and I don't like, usually in these kind of conversations, people go, well, okay, what's your framework? Like, tell me the 5 ways to do being a better listener. And I don't think that's what's necessarily needed here. I mean, what's your take on just like being good listeners? To me is like being on the path to being a better human. And Lord knows we all could improve in our humanness. And
Correct.
and just as this thing that I brought up, like people are learning and all of a sudden becoming more fearful and or wondering about like, well, what's this thing with artificial intelligence? Is it going to take away my job? And is it going to take over the world? And will it actually be a danger to humans? And so put in the context of how do us humans be more human and listening skills, like tell me what's your take on like how does this work? Like where does our listening engage with us actually being able to be people?
So listening is actually, it's the way to start a conversation and learn to drive deeper into a conversation. So chat GTP, whatever you want to talk, AI, even in bringing up the conversation, you automatically already know there's something about that conversation that's important to somebody. And what we'll do often is we'll actually just spin on that and saying, well, what do you think about that? And we'll start to get more understanding of like what's on their mind versus like how they actually feel about that, what their concerns are about that. Because I could probably, without even talking to this fictitious person, be able to say, like, okay, well, A, maybe it's going to take over your job, right? So then I'm asking, it's like, well, kind of, you know, specifically, what's concerning about that to you, right? And you're starting to drive deeper and get to the place of saying there's a root cause of all of the and listening just allows that space. And if there is a skill, it's just understanding beforehand get to with the conversation. And usually it's going to be they want to be heard or they want to know, well, be known, which is really saying like, do I have a place in this world or not? You know, being as broken and deficient as I feel or seem sometimes, do I still have a place on this earth? And good listening actually says, yeah, you do. And you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be, but most conversations never get there, even though that's probably everything else.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think it's so true that people want to be seen and they want to be heard. And in this context of this conversation, they want to be listened to.
Mm.
And this is where good listening skills come in. Like if you can achieve the goal of someone who you're interacting with feeling as though they've been listened to, as in they've been seen and they've been heard, that's a great, great goal in terms of as an intention to any conversation or any interaction.
Yeah,
It'd be
and
great.
and I probably got to go at some point. You can tell when it happens. You don't have to you'll see somebody that can be very concerned, and once they kind of felt heard or known, they'll change. And you'll see it right in front of your eyes. So I just kind of throw that in there as a freebie. So
Yeah, okay. Well, this is a really good note for us to close on. We're just at the end of our time together. And so, Jacob, if people want to hang out with you, if they want to go grab your book, what would be the best way for them to do that?
yeah, I mean, honestly, most of the time that I spend right now is on LinkedIn. So just do a search for me on LinkedIn, Jacob Coldwell, and then I guess the same on Amazon if you're interested in. You can just do a search on Amazon for my name, people name Jacob Coldwell, so it still works.
That's great. It's always good to have a unique name. I was looking
Yes.
with Forlorn at all the Brad Powells that are out there, and there are a lot. So, yeah, so it goes. Well, Jacob, thank you so much for coming on today. This has really been a great conversation. We went to a few different places, and yeah, let's keep working on being better listeners.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. This has been awesome.
Right. And for anyone listening at the end, if you are feeling like you've been a good listener, I want to just remind you that if you'd like to go and get other episodes of the Standout CEO Show, if you want to go and listen to all the video, all the audio, grab some of the show notes, grab some of the links to some of the freebies that are part of this experience, just go to standoutceoshow.com and it's all there. You can binge to your heart's content. And until next time,